Hi there. If you've made it here, thank you, truly. There's a kind of sacred quiet between us right now, isn't there? Maybe you came for a story, or maybe for something gentler than what the world gives you most days. Either way, I'm grateful you pressed play. Before we begin, I just want to say how much it means that you're here, listening. To those who've supported this channel, through your likes, your comments, your quiet presence, thank you for letting stories like this one be told. And if this one touches something in you, if it lingers, I hope you'll consider liking the video, subscribing, or even sharing your thoughts below. Not for the numbers, but because remembering, truly remembering, is something we have to do together. Now, let's take a deep breath, because what we're about to open is not a tale of triumph, not yet. It begins in silence, not the peaceful kind, but the silence that follows after something has been buried for too long. It lives in forgotten temples, in ruins overgrown with ivy. It gathers dust where once there were voices, and in the dim, broken corner of one such temple, there lies a book, its leather binding cracked, its title lost. Only one sentence remains, barely visible beneath the dust of centuries. Not all myths begin with glory. Some begin with silence. Would you open it with me? Its pages don't shout. They don't sing of conquest or thunder. They whisper, like breath against old stone. And what they whisper is everything that was left unsaid. We grew up with stories of gods and heroes, of lightning bolts and golden apples, of wars waged between immortals. But those stories are sharp, polished, carved into marble by hands that chose what to remember and what to forget. This is not one of those stories. This is the one that no one dared to tell. It begins not with a god, but with the sound of a door slowly creaking open. It begins not with conquest, but with absence, not with fame, but with the women whose names were taken. Can you hear it? The oil lamp flickers, and one by one shadows begin to shift. Out of the darkness, faces emerge. Not goddesses, not monsters, just women, breathing, waiting. They don't sparkle, they don't roar. They look at you not to beg, but to be seen, to be remembered. Each of them was once a person. Now, a tree, a swan, a star, Europa, Io, Semele, Callisto, and more. But we're not there yet. First, we stay here, in the stillness, in the temple that crumbles, where memory clings to stone like moss, where every crack is a name unspoken, where every gust of wind sounds like someone trying to scream through centuries of forgetting. Maybe that's why you're here too, because some part of you has felt it, that these myths are not complete, that beneath every heroic tale lies another, quieter one. One filled with hesitation, with questions that were never allowed to be asked, like, why do so many women in these stories disappear? Why do they turn into animals, into land, into stars? Why are they punished for being desired and forgotten for surviving? Tonight, we walk into those questions. We light a lamp in the dark. We say their names, not as lessons, but as people. We open a book that trembles in our hands, and we listen, because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is remember what they told us to forget. Are you still with me? Then let's begin, where no one ever dares to begin, with silence. There was a time when light meant safety, when a glow in the sky was a blessing, not a warning. But in these stories, the ones we were never taught to question, the light is a trick. It blinds, it lures, and behind it, there's always a hand, grasping, taking, without asking. They called him the King of Gods, ruler of Olympus. He held thunder in one hand and justice in the other, or so we were told. But Zeus never asked, he didn't offer, he didn't knock, he chose. And when he chose, The world changed. But not for him. For her. She lost her name, her shape, her voice. Let's start with the one you've heard of. Europa. The name of a continent, but not of a girl. She was picking flowers when he came. The earth was soft, the sky was gold, and then a white bull stood before her, gentle, beautiful, not frightening, not yet. He knelt. She laughed. She climbed onto his back, as if adventure were something a girl could survive. And then he ran. The sea split. The winds cried out. And Europa held on, to the neck of a god in disguise, to the last moment she would ever be herself. They say she became a queen in Crete. They say she was happy, but they never ask if she wanted to be there, if she wanted to be anything more than gone. Now her name is stamped on maps, Europa, but she never got to go home, and she was only the first. Then came Io, a priestess, a girl with sacred duties. Zeus covered her in mist, a fog thick enough to hide sin or shame, and when Hera grew suspicious, he turned Io into a cow. Because a woman with no voice is easy to forget, she ran. Across mountains, across deserts. Her hooves bled, her breath steamed, and Hera, in her fury, sent a gadfly, a biting insect that followed her to the ends of the earth. Each sting, a reminder, you're not safe, even in silence. Imagine this, a girl dreaming in a body that no longer understands dreams. A voice inside screaming, but all that escapes is a moo. She was once someone's daughter. Now she's just a line in a textbook, Bos Primigenius. And somewhere in the stars they named her again, as if that makes it better. Then came Semele. She didn't run. She loved, she believed. But belief doesn't save you in these stories. It gets you burned. Zeus came to her cloaked, shadowed, hiding who he truly was. And Hera, jealous, came too, disguised as an old woman, whispering poison. If he really loves you, make him show you his true form. And he did. And she died. Because gods aren't made to be looked at, only obeyed. Her body turned to ash, but not before giving birth to Dionysus, a god from a dead woman's womb. Zeus sewed him into his thigh, a father birthing a son from a lie. And what of Leda? She walked by a lake. The air was still. The day, soft. And then came the swan, white feathers, grace, power disguised as elegance. It curled its neck. It climbed into her lap. And then, it didn't ask. She gave birth to Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. But no one ever asked what it cost her to bring that face into the world, or what it's like to be remembered only for what your daughter caused. Light, mist, lightning, wings, each time a new form, each time the same crime. We called it mythology. We called it seduction. But it was never romance. It was transformation, used as a veil for violence. It was magic, used to erase consent. And the world remembered the god, never the girl. They told us the stories were beautiful. They printed them on vases, painted them in churches, taught them in classrooms. But the truth was buried under marble and metaphor. Until now. A voice, soft, shaking, speaks from the shadows. My grandmother had a name once, before she became a star in his sky. Do you see it now? The glow that blinds, not warms. The hand behind the thunder. The pattern behind the poetry. And maybe, just maybe, you feel it too. That somewhere deep inside these myths isn't glory, but grief. The story begins with a flower. She bent to pick it, just one among hundreds in a golden field that smelled like home. Her laughter rippled through the air, soft as the breeze that played with her dark hair. The sky above her held the stillness of late afternoon, and the earth below still remembered her footsteps. And that's when he appeared, a bull, white as winter moonlight, no dust on his hooves, no breath, no shadow, just silence that shimmered. The kind of silence that waits, that watches, that already knows how the story ends. Europa laughed again. A girl like her was not easily afraid. She had seen bulls before. She had fed them apples and scratched their ears and called them silly names. But this one stood still, as if carved from the bones of gods. He lowered his head. She touched his muzzle. Warm, alive, familiar. Her fingers curled into his fur like a child returning home. And when she climbed onto his back, she thought it was her idea. But the gods rarely wait for permission. The bull moved, first slowly, a playful trot along the edge of the field, then faster, toward the cliffs, toward the sea, toward something she couldn't name. Europa gripped his neck tighter. The laughter was gone now. The wind pulled harder. Her dress snapped in the air like a warning. And then he leapt, into the sea. Salt water rushed up to greet her. The bull swam with purpose, as if the waves themselves were obeying him. Europa screamed, but no one heard. She was already too far from the shore, too far from the life she thought she owned. No one came after her, no father, no sister, no priest. The world moved on, and on Crete she was reborn. They dressed her in silks. They crowned her with garlands. They called her queen. And when she bore Zeus 3 sons, they built her a temple, a monument to forgetting. But she remembered. She remembered the flower, the field, the sound of hooves over sand, the silence that wasn't silence at all, but surrender. Sometimes she would walk alone by the cliffs, staring out over the sea. The same waves that had once swallowed her life now sang lullabies she refused to listen to. Her sons asked her why she always looked east. She never answered. Because what is the use of answering when the language of your story has already been stolen? And so, the world carved her name into maps. Europa. A whole continent named after her, but not for her. Her name became a flag, a symbol, a claim, but never a home. The stones beneath her feet never spoke her native tongue. The festivals held in her honor never asked what she had lost. In a quiet classroom today, a child points to a globe. Europe, the teacher says, named after a girl in a myth. The child tilts their head. What happened to her? And the teacher blinks, hesitates, smiles. It's just a story. But it wasn't. It was a girl. A girl who held on to a creature she trusted. A girl whose name outlived her voice. A girl whose memory became geography. Some nights, when the wind shifts, you can still hear her. Not in the crashing of waves, not in the roar of bulls, but in the questions that go unanswered. What did she feel that moment her homeland vanished? What did she whisper just before the sea took her? And if she could return just once, what would she ask? Would she want her name back? Or would she simply want to be asked? Not all myths begin with glory. Some begin with a girl who said yes to the wrong silence and ended with no one asking if she ever came home. There are stories that begin with names, carved in stone, sung by bards, whispered by wind. And then there are stories like hers, ones that begin with breath, stolen in the middle of a prayer. Io was a priestess, a girl of silence and fire. She spoke to the gods with hands dipped in holy water. Her life was clean lines, soft chants, the weight of faith on young shoulders. But the gods do not always listen. Sometimes they watch. Zeus watched her, not her prayers, not her devotion, but her eyes, her walk, her skin. And one night, the clouds darkened not with rain, but with hunger. He didn't speak. He never did. He cloaked himself in mist, moved like a shadow, became the air around her. And when she awoke, she was not in her temple, not in her bed, not in her skin. She stood on four legs, fur, hooves, a tail that twitched with unfamiliar muscle. Io had been turned into a cow, not metaphorically, not mythically, literally, a creature that no longer owned a mouth fit for words, a body that obeyed a different rhythm. And yet, inside, the girl remained. She tried to scream, to explain, to cry, but all that came out was a sound meant for slaughterhouses and sacrifice. Mu. The gods called it mercy. They always do. Hera, not fooled by Zeus's lies, sent a fly. Just one, to torment her, day and night, on her eyes, her lips, her bleeding skin. And so Io ran, across deserts where her hooves cracked open sand, through forests where every tree turned its face, over mountains where echoes refused to repeat her voice. She ran through time, through geography, through memory. Everywhere she went, she left pieces of herself, scraps of girlhood flung against the bark of trees, the banks of rivers, the teeth of wolves. She lay once beneath a snowfall, a great white plain of silence, blood dripping from her mouth, a wound from biting her own tongue in a dream. Her eyes still looked like eyes, but no one looked back. Not the stars, not the gods, not the shepherds who thought she was just a beast gone mad. And in that silence, she thought, I still remember how to scream, but no one hears a cow. They say she crossed the Bosphorus, a strait named after her, the Oxford, the place a cow once ran for her life. They say she wandered to Egypt, where at last the gods took pity. Or maybe they grew bored. They let her be human again, let her speak, let her breathe in syllables instead of straw. But by then, what was left of her? A girl who had lived as an animal, a voice buried under years of silence, a body that remembered the pain of hooves even after she had feet. They made her a goddess, Isis, they whispered. But what is a crown to someone who has tasted mud? What is worship to someone who was once nothing but terror in fur? Io smiled sometimes, politely. She bore children. She wore jewels. She was painted on vases. But the wind, always the wind, brought back that buzzing, that tiny sound of a fly that knew her too well. And some nights she would press her face to the earth and moo, softly, as if calling back the girl who had once begged the gods to listen, and who learned, too late, that some gods only hear what they want. Even now the Bosphorus remains, a scar in the land, a whisper in the water, a place where a girl ran so far she crossed from one life into another. But she never stopped running. Not really. Because how do you stop when your voice was turned into a sound meant only to be ignored? There are questions that live inside lovers, quiet ones, burning ones, the kind that start as curiosity and end as catastrophe. Semele didn't want the sky. She didn't want a throne among the clouds or temples of marble carved with her name. She didn't even want to be remembered. She just wanted to know. The man who visited her at night, whose skin shimmered like warm sunlight through silk, who moved like thunder, softened by breath. He said he loved her. And perhaps he did. But he never said who he was. Each night, he kissed her brow and vanished with the stars. Each morning, she touched her stomach and felt something more than mortal stirring beneath her ribs. It was divine, yes, but so was fear. And doubt, when whispered gently enough, can bloom into certainty. Hera came, not as a goddess, but as a woman, old, kind-eyed, dressed like a servant. She brought no lightning, no crown, only a question. If he truly loves you, why won't he show himself? Semele held that question in her mouth like a coal she couldn't spit out. It burned slowly, silently, until it became a prayer. One night, when the stars hung heavy and the air tasted like storm, he came to her again, and she asked, Show me who you really are." He flinched, pleaded, said number, said please, said, "You don't know what you're asking." But love, or something like it, had already tied his hands. The gods, once sworn, cannot break their word, even to save the ones they love. So he stepped back and unwrapped his disguise. Light poured from him, not the golden kind, not the kind that warms cheeks or paints meadows, the kind that blinds, the kind that burns. Semele saw him in full, the king of thunder, the storm behind the sun. And for a moment she smiled. "I saw the stars," she whispered. And then she caught fire, not metaphorically, not poetically. Her skin peeled away in flame. Her voice cracked in the smoke. Her body turned to ash before her scream could finish. And yet, something remained. Among the cinders, in the womb of ruin, a heartbeat pulsed. The child, still alive. Zeus, trembling, sliced open his thigh, carved a space in his own divine flesh, and placed the unborn god inside. He stitched himself shut with lightning, and from his wound, in time, came Dionysus, the god of wine, of madness, of forgetting, of masks that laugh while eyes weep underneath. He was not born in joy but in sorrow, raised far from Olympus, hidden in woods, fed by nymphs, taught to dance, to charm, to lose himself in ecstasy so he wouldn't remember the silence where a mother's lullaby should have been. He never knew her, but her absence clung to him like the scent of burnt myrrh. And every time a mortal drinks too much, laughs too loudly, or stumbles too far into joy that borders on grief, Dionysus watches, and perhaps, in the back of his divine mind, he wonders, if she had not asked, would I have ever been born? They say Semele became a goddess. Thyone, they called her. They built her a temple, lit candles, spoke her name with reverence. But names do not cradle sons. Statues do not kiss burnt foreheads. And stars, cold, distant stars, do not hold hands. All that remains is a silence, the kind that follows a question mark, the kind that tastes like ash and memory, the kind that flickers behind every divine story and dares to whisper, "She only wanted to know." In the quiet after the burn there came a huntress, Callisto. She ran through forest like wind through leaves, silent, swift, faithful. She had given her life to Artemis, not just as a follower, but as a sister of the bow, a soul bound to the wild. A woman who had chosen freedom over courtship, arrows over wedding rings, loyalty over lust. She had made a vow, no man would touch her, not while she stood beside the goddess of the moon, of purity, of cold and radiant distance. But oaths mean little to gods who think they own the sky. Zeus wanted her, not because she smiled, not because she invited, but because she didn't. So he came in disguise, not as thunder this time, not as a storm, not even as a light. He came as Artemis, her voice, her scent, her arms. Callisto didn't resist. How could she? She had spent her life trusting that presence, worshiping it, sleeping with her hand on her bow only to dream of moonlight and sisterhood. And when the goddess called her close, she stepped forward. Only too late did she realize the voice wasn't hers. Only too late did the touch feel wrong. Only too late did the betrayal already bloom. And from that night, something else bloomed too. A life, unasked for, buried beneath ribs that still remembered how to run, how to aim, how to fight, but not how to survive this. Her belly swelled, the forest whispered. The other maidens looked away. And Artemis turned cold. There was no trial, no words, only the silence of exile. Callisto fell to her knees, reached for the goddess, called her name with the voice of a sister. Artemis didn't answer. She disappeared into the trees like mist. Callisto screamed until her throat tore, and still no answer. Then came the second punishment. Her body twisted, fur broke through skin, her hands became paws, her voice, the one that once sang prayers and roared with laughter, became a growl. She became a bear, alone, in the woods that had once sung her name in leaves. She gave birth in a cave, held her son in trembling claws, licked the blood from his cheeks, sang lullabies through aching breath, and watched the stars, hoping someone, anyone, still remembered her name. Years passed. Her son grew tall, strong, a hunter like she once was. He never knew his mother was watching him from the shadows. Never knew the bear he almost shot one day had once braided his hair in secret dreams. He raised his spear. She didn't run, didn't growl. She just looked at him, eyes full of sorrow. And perhaps something in him paused. A thread tugged in the blood, a whisper in the wind. But the gods didn't wait. Zeus, watching from above, reached down. Before the spear could fly, he seized them both, froze them in sky. A mother and son, inches apart, never to touch, never to speak. Just eternal, cold stars, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, glowing over a world that forgot how they got there. They call her Constellation Beautiful. They teach children her name now, but they don't say what she lost. They don't say how sisterhood turned away, how silence fell where justice should have risen, how a woman became a myth only after becoming a monster, only after being erased. Callisto never broke her vow, but everyone else did, and now she spins in the night sky, a symbol of motherhood, of wilderness, of betrayal written in light. And when you stare too long at the stars and feel something ache in your ribs, it may be her, still watching, still waiting, still wondering if Artemis ever looked back. Some stories vanish not with silence, but with a whisper that turns into a map. Have you ever traced a name on a map, a river, a mountain, an island, and felt nothing? Aegina, Ilara, Antiope, Io. They sound ancient, lyrical, almost poetic. Children learn these names in school. They memorize them, recite them, draw them on exams, but no one tells them what they mean, or who they were, or why their names are carved into the land instead of remembered in hearts. Because these were women. Women who were taken, used, discarded, and then renamed. Not with mercy, but with ownership. Zeus did not leave graves for his victims. He left geography. Take Alara. She was hidden beneath the earth, not metaphorically, literally buried. When she became pregnant, Zeus feared his wife's wrath. So he placed Alara deep underground, as if shame could be buried with soil. There she lay in darkness, growing a child she hadn't asked for. Her son, Tityos, would one day rise, a giant of rage and ruin. But Alara? She never rose again. Only the land remembers her. There's a place in Greece, the Alara district. Students draw it in blue ink. But no one asks what it means to be entombed while still alive, or to have your name survive, but not your story. Then there's Aegina. She was a princess once. Zeus came for her as an eagle. Because of course he did. Why not a symbol of power, of glory, of empire? He snatched her from her home, carried her to a deserted island, took what he wanted. She bore him a son. The island, once nameless, became Aegina, a badge of conquest, a trophy. Now it's a tourist spot. People visit, take photos, sip cocktails under the sun. No one remembers the girl who wept there first. No one thinks of what it means to name a paradise after pain. Antiope's story is told in fragments. Some say she was raped by Zeus in the form of a satyr. Others say she fled into madness. What's agreed is this: her sons grew up to be powerful. Her name lingers in valleys, in temples, in footnotes. But she herself remains a ghost, a footstep without an echo. And Io, we've already met her, turned into a cow, chased across the earth. Her path was so long it carved continents. Her tears fell into seas. Her name is on cities. But no monument stands for her voice, because she no longer had one. That's the cruelest trick of history, to steal a person, then keep the name, to hollow it out, polish it, and set it on a pedestal, while the soul it belonged to fades. They call it honor. They call it remembrance. But names without stories are just shadows. Say them aloud, slowly. Alara, Aegina, Antiope, Io. Do you feel them? The ache? The pause? The absence? Maps are full of these absences. Lines drawn with the silence of women who were never asked if they wanted to be remembered that way. Their names became lessons in geography, not empathy. And every time a teacher points to a place and says, "That's Aegina," a little girl might ask, "Who was she?" And the class will move on. Because no one told the teacher either. But somewhere, in the folds of mountains and the curves of rivers, those names are still weeping, still hoping someone will say, "We remember not just where, but who. Not just the land, but the loss." Because the earth does not forget. It carries every step, every scream, every silence. And if you listen closely to the wind that moves across Greece, you might hear them. Not the names, but the stories that were buried underneath. We say the names, but never the stories. Power doesn't always come with freedom. They called her Queen of the Gods, draped her in gold, crowned her with stars, placed her on Olympus beside Zeus, as if proximity to power meant having it. But Hera was never truly free. She was worshipped, yes, feared, yes, but not loved, not by the one whose love she had been promised, not by the people who only prayed to her when they were already betrayed. They paint her in myths as jealous, as cruel, as wrathful, but they never ask, why? Because being a goddess doesn't protect you from being humiliated, from watching your husband parade his conquests across the sky, from hearing the whispers, another mortal, another child, another secret. And what could she do? She couldn't strike him, not without unraveling Olympus itself. So she turned toward the only ones she could reach, the women. Not the seductresses the stories call them, but the victims. Leto, pregnant and alone. She had committed no crime except bearing Zeus's children, twins. But Hera declared, "You will not give birth on land, or sea, or any place touched by the sun." Leto wandered, her belly heavy with life, her back aching, her feet blistered. No island welcomed her. No home dared open its door. Until Delos, a floating rootless rock, accepted her. There, between water and wind, she gave birth to Artemis and Apollo. And even then she had to scream without silence, to tear herself open for two gods who would shine brighter than she ever could. Hera watched from her throne, silent, her nails digging into divine flesh. And one by one more women came. Semele turned to ash. Io turned to cattle. Callisto turned to bear. Europa turned to history. Each time Hera could not stop Zeus, so she stopped the women. It was not justice, it was fury with no safe direction. Because when your prison is love, who do you punish? They called her vengeful. But vengeance is what's left when no one listens to your pain. They said she ruled Olympus. But thrones are just chairs when your hands are tied. She sat there, day after day, watching the sky fill with her husband's legacy. Stars named after strangers, myths written in the blood of women. Her eyes did not weep. They crystallized. Tears turned to stone, heavy, sharp. She wore them like jewelry. She became the goddess of marriage, a cruel joke, as if she, of all beings, hadn't learned that marriage was sometimes just a leash made of vows. And yet, There is one truth they never say in temples. Zeus feared her, not because she was stronger, but because she remembered every name, every face, every silence. And in the end, what is more terrifying than a woman who cannot forget? They gave her temples. They lit fires in her honor, but none of it mattered, because her prayers were always the same. Let them feel what I felt. She never said it aloud, but the wind carried it, the rain echoed it, and the earth heard it. She ruled Olympus, but couldn't rule her own fate. Not even queens can change the script of a myth written by men. Not even goddesses can undo the cruelty of being forgotten in someone else's story. So next time they tell you Hera was cruel, ask them, who made her that way? And who left her to sit on a throne made of broken vows and shattered women? They call them heroes, demigods, sons of thunder, daughters of the moon, the blessed children of Olympus. But no one tells you this. They were born from pain, born from lies, betrayals, fear, born into the ruins left by love turned violent. The gods gave them power, yes, but never peace. Take Apollo and Artemis, twins of light and hunt. They came screaming into the world not in a golden cradle, but on a rock that floated in exile, Delos, the nowhere island. Because their mother, Leto, was cursed to wander, forbidden to give birth on any land touched by day. She clutched her belly as the stars spun above her, cried out as waves slapped her legs. And when the children emerged, no one sang. Only the sea listened. They grew, radiant, sharp, terrifying. Apollo with his golden bow, bringing disease and song. Artemis with her silver arrows, chasing freedom through forests. But their roots were exile. Their lullabies were the silence of their mother's shame. Then there was Perseus, the boy born from a locked tower, from a prophecy feared more than fate itself. His mother Danae was hidden away by her own father, because an oracle had whispered, "Her child will be your death," so he locked her in bronze walls. Zeus found her anyway, not as a man, but as golden rain. No one asks how a woman says no to rain. Perseus was born in a cage, and from his first breath was hunted. He grew to swing a sword that could cut through monsters, but never through the memory of what his mother had endured. And then, Heracles, glorious Heracles, son of Zeus, raised in a mortal home, blessed with strength, cursed with rage. Hera hated him not for what he did, but for who sired him. So she followed him like a shadow. One day, she touched his mind, whispered madness into his ears, and he killed his wife, his children, with his own hands. They say he wept in the ashes. They say he begged the gods for punishment. So they gave him 12 labors, not to heal, but to cleanse, to make the world forget the blood on his hands. But how do you clean grief? How do you carry the weight of power when it cost you everything? The truth is, the children of gods inherit more than magic. They inherit silence, legacy, myth. They are raised not to cry, but to conquer, not to ask why, but to endure. And so we remember them by what they killed, the Hydra, the Gorgon, the Niobids. But we forget what killed them: shame, loneliness, the ache of being born from a moment no one wants to speak of. Glory is loud, but pain is silent, and it lives in the cracks of their statues, in the faded ink of old papyrus, in the hush that follows every retelling. Not all divine children were lucky. Some were raised by nymphs, some by mortals, some by no one at all. But all of them carried a question behind their eyes. If my story had started in love, would I still be a weapon? And when they died, some as gods, some as mortals, the bards sang of victories, not of lullabies unsung, not of mothers who bled and were left behind, not of gods who turned their faces away from their own blood. Just names, just legends. But if you listen, really listen, beneath the fanfare, you'll hear it. A mother's cry, hidden in the echo of every cheer. A child's confusion, masked as courage. A wound, deep and invisible, shaped like a crown. They tried to outsmart fate. That's how the story begins. A prophecy whispered, bitter and cold. Your son will kill you. So the king of Thebes did what many kings do when fear grips their hearts. He ordered the child to be thrown away like a broken promise, pinned the baby's feet together, and left him on a mountain. Not because he hated the boy, but because he believed in destiny and feared it more than love. But fate, as always, doesn't ask for consent. It waits, and in time, it gathers its pieces. The baby was found, raised by another royal family. Oedipus, they named him, which means swollen foot. He grew up wondering who he was, where he came from, why the echo in his blood didn't match the lullabies he'd been given. And one day, someone told him a riddle. You are not who you think you are. So he did what heroes do. He searched for the truth. But sometimes, truth is a curse in disguise. On his way, he met a man on the road. An argument, a scuffle. A man dies, and Oedipus keeps walking, not knowing he's just killed his father. He saves Thebes from the Sphinx. He is hailed a savior, given a throne, given a queen. He marries her. They have children. He is finally home. But the ground shakes in Thebes. Plagues, deaths. Something is wrong. And in the silence that follows suffering, the gods whisper again. The rot lies in the truth. So Oedipus digs. He follows the thread, pulls and pulls until the tapestry unravels. And what he finds is not a crime, but a pattern. He didn't know. But he did. He didn't mean to. But he did. He looks into the eyes of his wife, his mother, and sees himself. Sees the boy abandoned. Sees the man crowned too soon. She hangs herself. He picks up the pins from her dress and drives them into his eyes, because he cannot bear to see the truth he found. He walks into exile, guided only by the sound of his own feet, and silence follows. People say he was cursed, but maybe the real curse was this. He asked questions. In a world where silence is safer, where obedience is rewarded, where kings don't want truth, just comfort, Oedipus didn't sin. He uncovered, he revealed, and the world, unready, called it a tragedy. But think for a moment. If you were told not to ask, if you were punished for knowing, if the ones who betrayed you still held the power to name you a monster, would you still seek the truth? Because here's the quiet horror. Fate doesn't care about your innocence. It doesn't need your permission, only your silence. And sometimes, it gets both. When a child is abandoned, when a mother buries her shame, when a city cheers too quickly, a story like this is born, and in every echo of his name, Oedipus, there is a whisper. Knowing is not a sin, but pretending not to might be. He is not a villain. He is not a warning. He is a mirror. And when you look closely, you may find the same question in your own reflection. What would I have done if I had known? There is a particular kind of fear that only kings know. Not the fear of death. They believe they are above that. Not the fear of loss. They believe everything belongs to them. No. What kings fear most is being replaced. And Zeus, king of kings, heard a prophecy. The child of Metis will be wiser than its father. Just one sentence. But it shattered him. Because Metis was not just anyone. She was wisdom itself. She didn't shout to be heard. She didn't fight to be feared. She whispered. And even the stars paused to listen. Zeus had once loved her, or something like it. But love, for him, was always a transaction. And when she told him she carried a child, his child, he smiled. Until he remembered the prophecy. Until he remembered how he had overthrown his own father, Cronus, and how Cronus had swallowed his children. The gods don't learn, do they? Zeus followed the pattern. He called Metis close, held her, kissed her, promised her the world, and then, with a spell older than Olympus, he opened his mouth and devoured her whole, swallowed not just her body, but her thoughts. And just before she disappeared, she whispered, "I will live in your thoughts." He laughed it off, said it was done. But days passed, and then weeks, and then pain began to bloom in his skull, sharp, constant, echoing, a storm with no lightning, a scream with no mouth. He pressed his hands to his temples, screamed, and in the quiet halls of Olympus, gods turned their faces. He tried everything, sleep, silence, sacrifice, but the pain only grew louder, more articulate, until it became a voice, her voice, Metis, thinking, speaking, whispering, inside him, not gone, not forgotten, just relocated. And one day, he could take it no longer. He found Hephaestus, the forge god, blunt and steady. "Split my head," Zeus said. Hephaestus hesitated. "Now," Zeus roared. And so, the hammer fell. A crack echoed across heaven, and from the split in Zeus's skull, a woman emerged. Athena, fully grown, wearing armor, holding a spear, eyes that had never been shut by childhood. A goddess born not from love, not from lust, but from thought, from strategy, from the unkillable mind of Metis. Zeus looked at her and felt pride and fear, because now he had both created and released what he most feared, a mind that did not need him. Athena never cried, never loved, never softened. She was brilliant, precise, unreachable. People worshipped her, built temples, prayed for justice. But she never forgot the silence she was born from, never forgot the mother whose thoughts had carved her into being. And Metis, still there, still whispering perhaps, in dreams. You can kill a voice, not a mind. The myths say Zeus won, that he outsmarted destiny. But tell me, what kind of victory is it when your enemy is you, and it lives in your head forever? When your crown rests on a skull that still echoes with the woman you tried to erase? There are many ways to lose power. One of them is thinking you've won it. And every time Athena speaks, every time a mind refuses silence, Metis smiles. Because she was never gone, only unspoken. She did not cry when she was born, because there was no womb to soften her arrival, only the crack of a skull splitting open and the blinding birth of thought. Athena came into the world not with the wail of a child, but with the clang of bronze. Shield in one hand, spear in the other, eyes sharp enough to slice a lie in half. She was not wet with blood. She did not tremble. No one held her. No lullabies. The gods stared. And somewhere in the hollow of Olympus, Zeus smiled with pride and flinched with fear. Because Athena was not made to please. She didn't flirt, didn't dance, didn't ask. She didn't fall in love. She didn't fall, period. Other goddesses softened into beauty, into want. Athena remained standing, straight-backed, dry-eyed, unbent. The mortals called her virgin, not because she was pure, but because she was untouchable. Men built cities under her name, hoping she would smile. But she never smiled. She granted victory, not affection. She offered justice, not warmth. They carved her face into marble, cold, controlled, complete. And still, not one of them asked her the question that lingered like fog behind her eyes. If I had a mother, would I still be this alone? Because she remembered, a whisper in her bones. A voice she never heard aloud, but always felt, curled in the back of her mind like a wind trapped in a jar. Métis, thought without softness, wisdom without hands. Athena walked the marble halls of Olympus like a sword walks a battlefield. She did not gossip, did not weep. She chose no consort, bore no children, because she knew what love cost women in Olympus. She had seen Semele, kissed into ash. She had seen Callisto, shunned into fur. She had heard the silent screams of Io, of Alara, of the forgotten girls mapped across continents. And Athena would not join them. She would be useful. She would be brilliant. She would be untouchable. Empires rose and fell in her name. Philosophers prayed to her between arguments. Warriors etched her crest on their shields. But no one dared ask, was she happy? And even if they had, she wouldn't have known how to answer, because joy was not what she was taught to feel. Only strategy, only silence, only strength. Athena stood atop the Parthenon, looking down at the city named for her. Not a daughter, not a sister, not a friend, but a symbol, a mind carved from fear, a woman with no mother, no tears, no room for loss. And still, sometimes, just sometimes, on nights when the stars blinked like old wounds, she wondered, if I had come from a womb, would I know how to be held? But the wind did not answer. It only whispered back her own name, Athena, born not to please, only to remember. Some stories don't end when the body does. They linger, in the bark of old trees, in the hush before a thunderstorm, in the aching stretch of silence where music should be. Marsyas was not a god. He had no throne, no worshippers, no golden crown. He had legs like a goat, a heart like a storm, and hands that trembled the first time they touched a flute. It wasn't even his. It had once belonged to Athena, the cold-born goddess who crafted it, breathed into it, then abandoned it. She looked in a mirror as she played, saw her cheeks puff, and found it ugly. So she threw it away. But Marsyas didn't find it ugly. He found it real. The flute did not shimmer like Apollo's lyre. It didn't promise glory. It remembered. It remembered the cry of wolves in winter, the lonely lullabies of shepherds, the wind moaning through the ribs of the forgotten. When Marsyas played, he wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to speak. And the sound, oh, the sound. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. And truth, in Olympus, was a dangerous thing. Apollo, god of the golden chord, heard the music one day. His fingers paused on his shining lyre. He frowned, not because it was bad, but because it wasn't his. He descended smiling like someone who had never lost. And Marsyas, wild, foolish, brave, stood up. Let's play, he said. Apollo blinked. A challenge? Marsyas nodded. Music for music. No gods, no tricks, just sound. The muses came to judge. The sky stilled. Mortals held their breath. Animals went quiet. Even the rivers forgot to flow. Apollo played first. His music was pure geometry. Every note a blade of sunlight, every chord a promise. Obey, admire, adore. Then Marsyas lifted the flute. And what came out wasn't divine. It was desperate. It was raw. It was the sound of a mother humming to a dead child, of a soldier whistling before battle, of a girl running through woods, hoping not to be found. The gods twitched. The muses leaned in, because the song did not worship them. It remembered who paid for their thrones. And Apollo grew cold. He smiled again, this time without warmth. He flipped his lyre upside down and played flawlessly. Now you, he said. But a flute cannot be flipped, and Marsyas could not. The muses frowned. Apollo declared himself victor. The gods clapped. The world sighed. And then, the punishment. He tied Marsyas to a pine tree, high in the Phrygian mountains, where no one could hear his cries except the trees and maybe the stars. Then he flayed him. He did not strike him down like a warrior. He peeled him, layer by layer, note by note, as if trying to erase the song from his very skin. Marsyas screamed, but he did not beg. The blood turned the roots red. The forest wept leaves. Even the earth ached. But the flute never stopped singing. Not in his hands, they were already gone. But in the wind, the branches, the ghosts. It plays still sometimes. When you're alone in the woods and the breeze moans just right, you might hear a tune that makes your spine shiver and your chest tighten. That is Marsyas. Not dead, only waiting. Waiting for someone to remember the difference between a performance and a plea, between a god's applause and a mortal's cry, between silence and surrender. And somewhere, far from Olympus, someone whispers again, "Who gave the gods the right to always win?" Some goddesses disappear when their temples collapse. Their names fall silent when the prayers stop. Their legends fade with the dust that settles on broken altars. But not her. Athena was never made of stone. She never needed hymns or sacrifice. She did not hunger for praise. She only ever asked for clarity, born not of womb, but of mind. No lullabies cradled her into being. She stepped into the world already armored, already knowing, and when the fires of Olympus dimmed, when the marble temples cracked, when her statues were dragged into museums framed in glass and labeled myth, still she remained. Not on mountaintops, but in minds. She lives where thinking refuses to surrender, where logic holds its ground against chaos, where truth walks unafraid through noise. You see, Athena was not just the goddess of war. She was the goddess of strategy, of law, of art not for beauty, but for meaning, of science not for progress, but for understanding. Her wisdom was not soft, it was steel. She walks through our world unseen, not as a specter, but as a principle. And every time someone chooses reason over rage, she walks a little taller. Imagine a classroom, dusty, fluorescent lit, echoing with tired voices. In the back, a girl lifts her hand, not to please, not to impress, but because the truth itches at her bones. She asks a question the professor wasn't ready for, and as he stumbles for an answer, her fingers press down on a worn book, a philosophy textbook, ink smudged and underlined, as if it were a shield. That moment, Athena is there, or a courtroom, the world watching. A woman stands, voice calm but full of fire. She does not cry. She does not accuse. She recites facts, holds the silence, and waits. That is Athena. Or a kitchen table. Late night. Two siblings arguing over what is right, not what is easy. One of them sighs and opens a browser, searches for sources, refuses to win on guesswork. That, too, is her. She does not need prayers. She needs people who refuse to stop thinking. Athena is not love. She is not comfort. She is not the one after the storm. She is the storm you weather because your mind says this is the right path. She was never meant to be worshipped. She was meant to be remembered and used. And every time someone chooses restraint instead of vengeance, clarity instead of noise, investigation instead of outrage, she survives another century. Her temple is not in Athens. It's in the questions whispered in classrooms, the quiet corners of law libraries, the silence before someone dares to stand and say, "I don't agree, but I want to understand." When you feel the urge to shout but choose to ask, Athena hears you. When you want to burn the bridge but instead write the letter, she nods. When you are terrified but refuse to be cruel, she places her hand on your shoulder. No one sees it, but you feel braver. She is not the warmth of Aphrodite, nor the chaos of Dionysus. She is the stillness in the middle of the storm, where decisions are made, where futures are built. She is not the loudest god, but she is the one who stays long after the noise has gone. The world may forget her name, but her work never stops. Because as long as one person chooses knowledge over ignorance, thought over reaction, justice over revenge, Athena still walks among us, not in glory, but in truth. At night, when the world forgets itself, we look up. We teach children the stars, point to patterns, draw lines between points of light. That one, we say, is Ursa Major. That's Europa. That's Io. That's Cassiopeia. But we rarely say this. They were once women, not gods, not beasts, not symbols carved into textbooks, but women, with hands, with hearts, with stories that bled. A grandmother sits with her granddaughter beneath a fading sky, a blanket over their legs, a cup of tea cooling beside them. She points upward, a finger tracing the sky like a memory long buried. "You see that shape?" she says, voice soft. "That's Callisto. She was a huntress. She ran and they turned her into a bear. But before that, she was a girl." The child blinks. "But why a bear?" The grandmother sighs. "Because they needed to forget she'd been betrayed." The stars above flicker, as if caught between wanting to shine and wanting to disappear. We map our cosmos with names: Ilara, Aegina, Antiope, Leda, names that sound beautiful in a telescope, but feel heavy when spoken aloud as they once were, from mouths that begged, from throats that were never heard again. A boy in a classroom learns constellations. He recites them proudly, but no one asks him, "Do you know what Europa wanted before she was taken? Do you know what Io said before her voice became a moo? Do you know how Semele burned before the stars claimed her?" We teach stars like trophies, but not the stories that bled into them. Every woman turned constellation was once a silence made permanent, because the sky, you see, is full of names, but almost no stories, not the ones that mattered. And yet, sometimes when the wind is still, you can see the stars shift, not literally, but almost. Callisto's eyes glint again from the arc of Ursa Major. Io's tear falls through Taurus. Europa's longing echoes across the curve of the Milky Way. They whisper, not to be worshipped, not to be feared, but to be remembered right. Not as beauty, not as symbols, but as selves, as voices that once asked for choice, as bodies that once ran from gods and were caught, as mothers who never got to raise their children, as girls who just wanted to walk the forest without becoming a myth. A whisper runs beneath the stars, woven through centuries of forgotten breath. We were never myths, we were memory. And memory, even when carved into the sky, can still fade. So ask yourself this, gently. If you were taken, if your name became a shape in the sky, would you want to be remembered for the shine of your star? Or for the weight of your story? Would you want them to say, "That's Cassiopeia, her figure was lovely"? Or, "That's Cassiopeia, she spoke too much for men's comfort and they punished her with silence"? Because the stars remember, but it is people who forget. And every night when we look up, we have a chance to remember again, to say their names, to tell their stories, to turn myth back into voice, because names in the sky are not enough. Stories are what keep you human, even in the dark. What remains? When the myths go quiet. Not all myths are born to glorify gods. Some are stitched together from silence, from the soft, unmarked graves of voices that were never meant to be heard. And when we listen closely beneath the thunder of Olympus, beneath the golden masks of heroes and kings, we hear something else: grief, longing, and women, turned into islands, into animals, into stars, who were never asked what they wanted. This story was not about the gods. It was about those who had to live with them, about the price of being seen, and the even greater price of being silenced, about names that became constellations but never escaped sorrow, about questions that burned more than any lightning bolt. So if there's one truth that remains, it is this: memory is resistance. Every time we speak a name with care, every time we tell a story that was once buried under marble and myth, every time we choose to remember, not revere, we give voice back to those who were never supposed to have one. Let that be the lesson. That silence is not absence. That forgotten does not mean gone. That myth was never just fantasy. It was memory in disguise. And now, if you're still here, still breathing with the rhythm of these stories, thank you. Truly. You chose to remember, to listen. And in doing so, you helped 1,000 unnamed women whisper back from the stars. We were never myths. We were memory. If this story stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet and true in you, consider liking, subscribing, or even just leaving a thought in the comments. It helps us keep telling the kinds of stories that don't usually get told, the soft ones, the difficult ones, the on. And if you return again, maybe on another quiet night, we'll be here, waiting with another story, one that might just change the way you see the world. Until then, take care, and let the sky remind you. Some names shine not because